Okay, so it's Dr. L continuing on from this fact about pediatric poisoning. Let's see, here we go. So what can we do? We just in the first part of this lesson talked about the seriousness of this issue. Let's think about what can we do about it, right? So first let's do a little bit of good news, right? The good news is the overall incidence of childhood poisoning has declined in the U.S. since 1972, when it was really first taken as a serious issue. Okay, so this graph over here on the right, and this data that I'm showing you here comes from the Consumer Product Safety Commission, an independent governmental agency responsible for giving us safe products, and they are one of the really important sources of information and action to combat any sorts of dangers to children from the products that are sold, and this includes things that poison children. It's a really, really important agency. So they produced this nice summary information, and this is also from 2020, this information. So if you look over here on the right, I want to point out that in 1972 there were 216 fatalities from pediatric poisoning, accidental poisonings, and over here on the right it was from 2018 to 2020, in a 2-year period, there were only 31. So significant decline overall in childhood poisoning. That's good news, right? That means we're doing something right. So what are those things, right? We'll get to that in a moment. So here's some bad news. So the bad news is there's still, pediatric poisoning is still the 3rd leading cause of death in children in the United States today. And the children that are being affected, there are way too many kids affected, and the effect is disproportionate. So some groups of children are hit harder than other groups. So ethnicity and race falls into this. So there are, if you look at the number of kids that are poisoned based on the total number of children, or the total number of children poisoned, right, like a normalized data set, even though Black African Americans constitute only 13.4% of the population, this was from 2020, they had 19.8% of the, that group represented 19.8% of the pediatric poisoning. So that's disproportionately affected. It should be 13.4 if they're proportionate. And similarly, in Hispanic children, although in 2020 that was 18.5% of the population, the Hispanic group or ethnicity, it's 19.1% of the poisonings. This is just what's reported, right? So ethnicity and race, that data tells us that some groups are more affected than others when it comes to pediatric poisoning. More male children than female children are poisoned, and that's been consistent for decades now. So male children are disproportionately affected at young age. That shifts in adolescence. So little kids, when they're poisoned, it's more boy babies than girl babies. But when you look at adolescents, there's a shift over to where a lot of the poisonings are attempted suicide, and a lot more girl children, a lot more females are attempting suicide. So we see a little bit of a shift there, right? And then that tells us too that the pattern or epidemiology of this problem shifts as you go up in age groups and kids. So young children, more of them are poisoned accidentally, and in teens there is a shift over to there's still accidental poisoning, but there's more suicide attempts in teens, and that is epidemic. That is a growing problem, right? And that tends to be more female teens than male teens, although male teens are also in the group that are at risk to suicide. These are things we need to study and work on and improve. We've got to do better, okay? So what are things that have made a difference in the past decades? What are things that have brought down the overall incidence of pediatric poisoning? One was that in 1972, something was passed, a law was passed, the Poison Prevention Packaging Act, PPPA, and it required childproof packaging. And after that went through, there was a significant decline in childhood poisoning fatalities of 45%, right? And so household products, medicines, solvents, all of these now come in childproof or allegedly childproof containers, and they are better and they are making a difference. So that law really helped save a lot of kids' lives, right? Better labeling is part of that law. So all of these labels like keep out of reach of children, this is part of education. So if people are looking at labels, it should be really clear when something is dangerous to kids, and they can then like take different actions to protect their kids. Some of the laws around medications and packaging have also changed. So not too many years ago, we started to see a lot more requirements to put particularly dangerous medications into packaging that is called unit dosing. The nickname for this is blister packs, where a daily dose, or maybe the morning and then the PM, is put into a little foil wrapped package, and you pop that thing out one at a time. And that might not seem like a big change, but this means that when a kid gets this medication, which they shouldn't, but if they do, they're not getting a whole vial. So they're not opening a whole vial of pills, which then it's easy to slide the whole thing into their mouth. It's also easier to see how much they have been dosed by, because you can count the number of pills in the package and you can see what is missing much more easily. So when you call poison control, you know what they took and you knew how much they took, as well as when they took it. And that information can save a child's life. There's more work in progress. So passing laws is really complex, right? So not yet in law. It can take years and years and years to pass new laws. So back in 2020, begun in 2019, and still not passed today, was this law, the fixed quantity unit of use blister packaging for certain immediate release opioid analgesics for treatment of acute pain, establishment of a public docket, request for comment. So this is like a stage in the lawmaking process. So this is the FDA trying to get particularly dangerous opioids used for pain treatment medically delivered not in a bottle or not in a vial, but in blister packaging, which would make a lot of sense. That's still not law, right? This takes a long time, but that would help reduce opioid poisoning in pediatric cases. There are also laws, guidance, and recommendations for carbon monoxide detectors in homes. Remember that exposure to gases, fumes, and solvents was one of the leading killers when kids are poisoned, and carbon monoxide is a big chunk of those. So there is a requirement. Building codes across the country will require carbon monoxide detector installations. There are state laws. They vary, but the majority of states require them. And there's guidance put out by the National Fire Protection Agency recommending them. So like making sure that your carbon monoxide detectors are installed at good locations and that they're working is a way you can protect your entire household from poisoning by carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is a super dangerous chemical. It's odorless, and it is produced when we have incomplete combustion of fossil fuels. So if your furnace that burns heating oil or propane is not running correctly, carbon monoxide will leak into the atmosphere of your house. And when you inhale it, it binds to your hemoglobin and it inactivates it, so you're not then able to move oxygen around in your blood supply. Because kids are so small and they have a really fast ventilation or breathing rate, they're particularly susceptible to carbon monoxide. It's very easy for them to die from carbon monoxide poisoning. Very, very lethal. Here's another example of a law, right? It's this law is something being passed within a larger law called FIFRA, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. This is the law that controls pesticides in the United States, and it's not yet through, but FIFRA is seeking to amend its larger structure so that they can more easily ban chemicals in the United States that are already banned in other countries because they are so dangerous, so lethal, so acutely toxic, and so chronically toxic. So to me, this just seems like common sense that if other countries have done the work to figure out that these are dangerous, that why then should we have to repeat that work? We should simply be able to also ban them in the United States. But surprisingly, that's not already in law, and so FIFRA is trying to move that through. So these are things that anybody can look up and can even comment on during the public comment section if you're interested in doing that. Another way to combat pediatric poisoning is through education. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, which I mentioned earlier, did a lot of the work on education. So like flyers and outreach, really, really huge in gathering data and conveying the significance of this pediatric poisoning problem that we have. So there's a link to their Safety Education Center. The American Academy of Pediatrics, or the AAP, does a lot of research and educates medical practitioners who can then educate families. These are just a couple of areas of education. I think we could do a lot more in the area of education and the protection of children against common poisons in their households. And I mean, really, we should all feel called to do this, to lean in, because kids should be safe in their own homes. And it's really unacceptable that we have such a high fatality rate in children. And, you know, fatality is the worst outcome. There are also just a lot of children that are harmed, frequently permanently, from consuming poisons in their own homes, a place where they should be safe. So I've mentioned some of the areas that are relevant here, but certainly not all. This is a big, big topic. And with that, I'm going to conclude this lesson. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.